Welcome everyone to today's Taking Care of Cape Cod, Can My Business Compost? I'm Gabrielle Rawson. I'm the news director for Cape Media News, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's session. This is the second virtual meeting hosted by CARE about a Clean Cape and Islands Summit, which is a collaborative effort of CARE for the Cape and Islands, the Center for Coastal Studies, and the Cape Cod Anti-Litter Coalition. A couple of housekeeping issues before we begin. Everyone except the speakers have been muted, but we encourage you to ask questions in the chat box, which will be monitored by Meg Morris of Cape Cod Anti-Litter Coalition and answered at the end of the presentation. Jill, as Director of Care for the Cape and Islands, why don't you start us off?
Sure, thanks, Gabby. So good morning, everyone. Today's discussion begins to answer the question, can my business compost? Our ongoing summit theme is protecting the environment from plastic pollution and litter. We see an abundance of takeout containers due to the tourism community and our current health situation. And there are many choices regarding packaging for meals. Of course, ideally, we would like to see the use of reusable plates and silverware instead of disposable. But in the meantime, we're bringing these four speakers who are working on our collaborative to discuss options and the impact upon our environment. So our first presenter this morning is going to be Mary Ryther, the owner and operator of Compost with Me, followed by Stephanie Murphy from Woods Hole Sea Grant and Christine Shreves from the Wellfleet Recycling Committee, both of whom are co-leading our cooperative purchasing working group and the creators of the soon-to-be-released purchasing guide of eco products for food service providers. And our final presenter this morning is going to be Tracy Berry Hunt, who's actually been successfully composting food waste from their restaurant, the Winslow's Tavern in Wellfleet. So Mary, why don't you start this off and tell us a little bit about the state of composting on the Cape and why businesses should be interested in composting.
Thanks, Jill. So this is Mary of Compost with Me. Generally speaking, the state of composting on the Cape is that many Cape Cod restaurants are successfully composting their food scraps at home, but not everybody can do that. So happily, a number of local transfer stations have residential food waste collection depots included at the transfer station. Some of these drop-off sites are serviced by Watts Family Farm or my business, Compost with Me, and soon Black Earth Compost will take over my municipal clients. Commercial food scrap composting, unfortunately, is very limited on Cape Cod, due mainly to the lack of commercial or municipal scale compost sites. So that makes this conversation really timely. However, there is good news. I mentioned earlier the company Black Earth Compost, and starting in July 1st, 2020 of this year, Cape Cod businesses will have the opportunity to work with Black Earth, who will begin servicing commercial businesses and municipal clients then. So so Jill asked also about why businesses should compost. So I'll try a quick screen share here. So composting not only reduces food waste, but it also helps us recognize and reduce the plastic, paper, and fossil fuels associated with wasted food. Composting can reinforce the environmental mission or core values of a business owner or even a whole community. We offer our customer this window sticker to let the world know what you're up to. Composting provides a concrete opportunity to brand your business as eco-conscious and attract like-minded customers. And trust me, the idea of displaying the window sticker really does work. I do frequently get calls from people that say they saw that someplace. Composting saves landfill space. And maybe you didn't know, but the one and only active landfill on the whole Cape is in Bourne. Maybe most importantly, compost reduces methane emissions from the landfilling of food waste. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas which is created when food waste decomposes under anaerobic conditions, such as in a landfill. Composting is an aerobic process which does not create methane. Stephanie, I know you've done a lot of research and gathered quite a bit of data. What did you find?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I'm happy to share what I learned when looking into this. As we began putting this presentation together, we realized we needed a little bit of background on food waste itself. And as I did the research, I'm no expert in this, but as I did the research, I found it really eye-opening, and I hope it will be eye-opening for you as well, and inspirational. I mean, it turns out that food waste is actually a really big part of the global plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in that sense, as I said, I found it very inspirational, and that is why I labeled my first slide, why composting your food will make you feel amazing. So most everyone knows that composting is good for the soil. It's nature's way of recycling organic material. Microorganisms break down their yard waste and food trimmings and put those nutrients back into the soil. But in addition to that, reducing food waste and composting is good for the environment by reducing the use of resources used to grow, process, and transport wasted food, as well as reducing methane in landfills. Consumers want to support sustainable businesses, and it turns out composting your food waste will save you money. Our global population is 7.8 billion people. It's a lot of people to feed, but we grow enough food to feed 10 billion people. So a lot of that excess food becomes waste, as it turns out. In the US, we generate 60 million tons of food waste, and 40 million of those tons are transferred to the landfill. That's the equivalent of 80 billion pounds of food waste. So according to the USDA, in the US, food waste represents 30 to 40% of our food supply, which is kind of a mind-blowing number. You buy 5 apples and 40% of them are wasted, you've got 3 apples left. It's a similar number globally, and it turns out that political and environmental leaders across the globe are recognizing food waste as a major issue, and the UN has developed a sustainability goal calling on the world to cut in half the per capita global food waste by 2030. According to the EPA, more food reaches the landfill than any other municipal solid waste, and that generates between 15 and 20% of all US methane emissions. Methane, as Mary mentioned, is a potent greenhouse gas, at least 25 times as powerful as CO2. The US restaurant sector generates about 11.5 million tons of food waste annually at a cost which adds up to about $25 billion. Approximately 4 to 10% of food purchased by restaurants is wasted before it reaches the customer. And some of the causes for that are overproduction for buffets, the trim waste during prep, overcooking or mishandling food by holding it at the wrong temperature. Also extensive menu choices. By having too many choices, it makes it difficult to manage your inventory. So as restaurateurs, by reducing your food waste, not only can you contribute to reducing the amount of methane in the environment, but you can also save yourself money. Some of that savings comes just by observing your operation and adjusting your food purchases accordingly. According to ReFed, which is a nonprofit collaboration of industry, governments, foundations, and nonprofits that are focused on reducing food waste, waste tracking and analytics are where the majority of the savings can come from. And it's a key strategy for reducing the inefficiencies in food purchasing and kitchen prep. There's many levels of tracking, and it's often combined with composting. So the simplest method is to just eyeball the food that you put into your compost bucket. and make a mental note of it. Some restaurants collect more detailed data on the specific foods and how much they weigh for each type of food. And that data becomes a really powerful tool when making purchasing decisions. So you buy less of the foods that you tend to throw away, and you save money. This concept is catching on. The National Restaurant Association surveyed 500 restaurant owners, and about half of them said they currently monitor the amount of food waste that their business generates. Diverting food waste from your restaurant's trash into a composting system can also save money on trash hauling costs. Food waste is one of the heaviest kinds of material you can put in your trash. So by removing food waste from the regular trash, you lower the weight of the trash that you have to pay to have picked up. To find out what your cost savings will be, you have to compare your cost for trash hauling with the cost of compost pickups. But one reference point I found in my research was the Westin Hotel in Waltham said they save about $10,000 a year by composting, because they pay less per ton for composting than they do for trash hauling. There's also a significant reputational value to reducing your food waste and composting. The public is paying attention to this, and excuse me, a survey conducted by the National Restaurant Association of top chefs found that food waste reduction was a top 10 hot trend in 2017. And consumers are saying they care about that. A study by Unilever Food Systems found that 72% of diners care about food waste, and 47% of them are willing to spend more to eat at a restaurant with an active food recovery program. So with all the benefits of composting, by helping the environment, reducing methane, reducing the use of landfills, reducing the energy and other resources that are wasted growing and transporting food that's never eaten, and improving the perception of your brand and saving money. With all of that, it's surprising to note that according to the National Restaurant Association, only about 14% of restaurants actually compost. But if you look at this chart, you'll see that about a quarter of the people who responded in the survey said that they don't know how to get started composting. And so, Mary, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about composting. How does it work? Can you kind of demystify that for us?
Sure. Let's see. Share my screen. So I can give you a little quick summary about farm-based composting. As a preface, compost sites and facilities are all different, using various methods and technologies. So this is just a brief summary of how my site works. Food scraps are collected at restaurants, schools, businesses, and hauled to the farm compost site. Upon arrival, the food is mixed with other feedstocks, mainly carbon-rich materials such as leaves, wood chips, and shredded food-grade cardboard, like pizza boxes. If you haven't heard the term before, feedstocks are simply the materials used to make compost. It's what composters call the ingredients in their compost recipe. Food scraps and carbon materials are mixed by pitchfork and tractor and formed into long windrows, which are linear shaped piles. The windrows are monitored over weeks to be sure they achieve and maintain the threshold temperature of 130 degrees or higher for a minimum of 14 days. This is called the thermophilic phase. The high temperature is important because the heat makes the compost safe from human pathogens, weed seeds, and it will break down plant-based plastics known as PLA. The picture you're looking at here is a steamy hot windrow. Sometime, maybe this was February or March, and it was definitely 130 degrees. After the very hot active phase is complete, which may take 8 to 10 weeks at my particular site, the compost transitions to a warm and slower phase of decomposition for several months. That phase is called the mesophilic stage. Depending on the compost method, the compost may be finished and ready for use as a soil amendment anywhere between the range of 6 to 18 months. My site is closer to the 18 months. Use of higher technology composting methods can produce finished compost in a much shorter time frame than more traditional low-tech methods. One chore that we do throughout all phases of the compost process is removing contaminants from the compostable material. Food scrap composting invites all sorts of unwanted items into the mix, most frequently tableware of the metal or plastic variety, plastic gloves, kitchen equipment, and a lot of shellfish shells. One of the most critical aspects for successful composting is maintaining a clean feedstock. It's very important that everything we put in our windrows is compostable. Christine, I know that you're working on a purchasing guide to help restaurants choose the right type of disposable, compostable cups and food containers. Can you share some of your findings with us?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Mary. I have some slides that I'm going to take one moment to bring up here, hopefully one moment. Stephanie and I have been working on a purchasing guide, and I want to share with you some of the things that we found out. As most of us know, reusables are always the most sustainable option. They're not an option right now, unfortunately. And so we're going to be talking about disposable products. The number one that hopefully all of us know is that we want to avoid single-use plastic products. We all know that plastic's a human and environmental health hazard and a huge litter and disposal issue. About 50% of plastic produced is for single-use products, and the vast majority is not recycled. What we recommend is that you choose compostable products that are made from these materials: paperboard, which is thick paper; molded fiber, which is made from wheat straw, bamboo, or a sugarcane byproduct called bagasse, from both bamboo and palm leaf, and from PLA. PLA stands for polylactic acid, and it's a plastic substitute that's made from fermented plant starch. There are definitely some issues which I'll get into later about PLA, but in terms of cutlery, there aren't a lot of non-plastic options right now. So bamboo and palm leaf, or bamboo is available, birch, but they are generally more expensive, less cost competitive. Some more on compostable foodware guidelines. The number one way to distinguish a compostable product is to look for the Biodegradable Product Institute certification label. That's an image of it. Products are also marked as compostable, but because there are so many caveats and ins and outs of treatments and linings, many composters just say, look for BPI products, in terms of verifying that you're not sending any contaminants to their compost facility. We recommend choosing paperboard products that are lined with wax, clay, or with PLA. And paperboard products lined with PLA look identical to paperboard products lined with plastic. For example, a coffee cup, you really can't tell the difference. So we advise that an establishment not mix products that have any plastic linings or plastic products if they're using compostable products. We recommend that the molded fiber products that you choose be lined with PLA. Some research in the last couple of years has shown that there are unsafe fluorinated chemicals that are used to treat molded fiber products to make them resist moisture and oil. And many companies are now looking for alternatives to that because of the human health and environmental issues associated with it. Bamboo, palm leaf, and birch are other options. As I mentioned, they do tend to be a little less cost efficient. And PLA cutlery. We recommend that you do not choose PLA cups or food containers. We'll get more into that, but they are clear. They look identical to PET plastic, and there are disposal issues regarding them. Here's some examples of compostable paper cups. The first Eco Products cup is a double lined with PLA, so that means that it's extra resistant to liquid for longer periods of time, and it comes with a PLA lid. Most paper cups offer, number one, they offer plastic lids. That's the most common. Sometimes PLA lids. The other cup is a cold cup with lined with wax, and I just learned from Mary yesterday that there is a petroleum-based wax, which is what's sort of the default in the industry. But anything that is certified by EPI is made with a bio wax, most likely a soy wax. Beeswax is another option, but it's quite expensive. Here's some examples of food containers made from paper. The soup container is lined with PLA, and it has also a paperboard lid, also lined with PLA. And the food trays come in different sizes, 1, 2, 3 pound, and they are made with a clay-coated paperboard to make them resistant to moisture. I was very happy to see some relatively new products that weren't out there a year ago when I was looking for things that are, and that's the molded fiber lined with PLA. Mary has mentioned that PLA linings are not an issue for composters, composting farms, but that the clear PLA products in large volume, if you get too much of them, they are a problem. More about that later. So here we have both the clamshell and trays that come in all sizes, and they always have PLA lids. World Centric has a fiber lid, which doesn't have any lining on it. It's just a lid to keep things in place. Some composting do's and don'ts. The first thing is always to consult your compost hauler about what kinds of food service products they accept. As I mentioned before, don't use PLA cups or food containers. PLA doesn't break down into organic matter, and it looks like clear plastic, and that makes it very risky as a contaminant to recycling. And keep your compost free of contaminants. Mary's been telling us stories about the kinds of things she pulls out of her compost deliveries from restaurants. Plates, cutlery, metal cutlery. So some don'ts. Don't use plastic disposable foodware or cutlery because it looks identical to the PLA cutlery. Don't use paper products lined with plastic. They are not recyclable. So that's what I have to share today. There are some good options out there. And the purchasing guide will hopefully help you make some environmentally sound choices. But Mary, we've wondered about how it is that your restaurants that you service set up their kitchens. Is that a problem?
Thanks, Christine. No, it's not a problem. It's really pretty easy. I'm going to try to show a couple of slides. Let's see. Oops. I'm going to try to bring up these. Okay. So, so we start every new client with a kitchen tour to help the owners plan for and set up generally multiple collection points in a kitchen, depending on the size of the kitchen and the variety of the menu choices. Clear signage will help compost programs run smoothly. So this is an example from a restaurant. I guess I'll shout out the Landfall in Woods Hole, where it's a big restaurant and they have multiple food collection sites, one of which being the bar. And so what we did was look at what they have at the bar, chicken wings, French fries, cut up fruit for drinks, and little cocktail napkins. So we put those on the sign so the bartenders and the barbacks knew what to go in the compost. And then we put a note down at the bottom what not to put in, because I guess it's not always obvious. So we have no-nos included. We positioned these containers, kitchen, coffee prep, bar, plate scraping station. I mean, every restaurant is different. And we want to make that clear for everybody in the restaurant. Oops. Let's see. My slide share. I'm gonna stop sharing that for a moment. Signage shows exactly which materials go into the containers, which you saw, and we laminate the signs. And I find that it's really important to use visual cues on the signs so that everyone understands the message. Not everybody reads all the fine print that well, and it's better to put pictures. That's what we find works. Staff will empty small indoor containers into the larger outdoor collection barrels or toters. Might be at the end of the shift, might be more frequently. That's just something that the kitchen staff needs to work out with the chef. And they need to keep their indoor containers clean up to the standards of their kitchen. So from the restaurant point of view, from the collection point for a restaurant, that's my point of view. I would love to hear Tracy's perspective, since she runs a successful restaurant which actually composts on site, which I find is an interesting option, and especially when commercial compost collection isn't available yet. Tracy?
Thanks, Mary. Well, I'm excited to be here because I've been composting at Winslow's for the past 10 years. And honestly, 10 years ago, it started with me putting pickle buckets into the back of my car, strapping in my 3-year-old, and trying to get them back to my house to use a three bin chicken wire, kind of a homemade thing my husband made for me. Here we are 10 years later, lots of different experiences. We tried, there was a little pilot program when I was on the recycling committee that we were trying to do some commercial composting, but we're in Wellfleet and we're in the Outer Cape. And it would be easy to throw your hands up and say, with all of those obstacles, transportation, we don't have enough space, we don't know how to do it. This is why we're here and talking about it. I'm here to say, yes, you can compost. And where we're at now is that we invested about $2,000 last year in 4 Swedish 9.5 cubic foot tumblers. They don't take up that much space. They're in the same area where we have our 8-yard dumpster and our 10 recycling toters. And right now, or last year, what we did quite successfully, and I would say it's the pinnacle of what we've been able to achieve with on-site composting. We composted everything coming out of the kitchen. And the first point with the kitchen scraps that we're using is we evaluate whether they can be used in another capacity, whether that's beet tops and carrot tops that can be pickled, fermented, dehydrated. What's exciting about the industry, a chef like Dan Barber, all of the innovation that's being brought to looking at food waste and trying to address this problem, we don't want to put it necessarily in the composter. We want to evaluate first and foremost what can be done to divert it creatively. So what's going in our composters from the kitchen successfully? We have reusable pickle buckets that are set up in all of the stations. And on an average day, and we're a high volume, we're a large restaurant, we're going through consistently 5 to 10 full buckets and prep that are going into those units, those tumbler units. And for the most part, because they're a higher temperature, they're able to generate a higher temperature like you talked about. We're getting a couple of weeks where we then move the product out and can continue that cycle. So the kitchen scraps program has been successful. A lot of restaurants will say, hey, we can't what about table scraps? If you can't do everything, why do it? Table scraps for us, we took a step back. We start with addressing food waste and looking at the menu, streamlining the menu. If we're using sugar peas in one recipe, can we use them in 2 other recipes so that we're less likely to throw something out and we can manage the ingredients and all of our dishes? We're looking at portions, and then we're looking at how we communicate to guests, because we actually don't have very many table scraps. That's, in my mind, it's not a successful experience if the portions are so large and you're carrying home half of your food. How could we have avoided that? That's not what we want to do. So that's one way that we address table scraps, because table scraps are a little bit more complicated for us: oil, grease, the speed at which we move. And that just brings me to, one thing I talk about a lot, especially with the staff, that, we're passionate, we're not preachy, and we want percentages. A lot of people, again, will think, hey, this is too complicated, I can't do it. This webinar is demonstrating, look, there are a lot of fantastic resources. There's a lot more information out there. You don't have to buy a $20,000 digestive belly unit. You don't have the space. Whatever percentage you can do, if you're a small restaurant, a cafe, if you're a larger restaurant, start with percentages. If every restaurant, I tell the staff, we may not hit 100%, particularly on weeks when we're moving really fast in August, but don't give up. I'd rather hit 85% and continue to push that forward than to not attempt at all. And a final thought is that, look, if you have access to commercial composting, and we hope that there is a greater demand from restaurants, because then that will be met with businesses who then, hopefully are coming out to the Cape who can offer that. That's a fantastic option, because Mary, what you brought up, the signs, the ability to get the product, the waste out of the restaurant safely and into a unit so that it can be taken out frequently, is probably a restaurant operator's greatest challenge. So I'm excited. Commercial composting coming to the Cape. Please tell us this is good news. So Mary, you had mentioned that I think the company is starting up in July. Do you have a little bit more information about how that might happen? And for other restaurants on the Cape, how could that impact them if those services become available?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So starting July 1st, my commercial customers are going to be taken over in Falmouth by Black Earth Compost. Unfortunately, the pandemic has sort of thrown everything into a questionable state as to when they will actually be able to have a critical mass of clients ready to get them started to go all the way down Cape. So that's a bit of a question mark. But they are a relatively large company. They're based on the North Shore, and they have several compost sites now. I think the closest one is in Mansfield, and they're working on developing a site in Plymouth. So all the parts are there, and we're just hoping that now they can piece together enough jobs to get a foothold here so that they can make it worth their while and probably start coming once or twice a week. My company for the past several years have been during the summertime operating 7 days a week during the busiest season. So it'll be a little bit of a challenge. And again, with the coronavirus crisis, it's I don't need to say what that's done to food service. So we're feeling our way here. But yeah, it's great news. And I think we can add contact information perhaps to this site afterwards when it's distributed.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds to me like that is the wrap up of our first informational session on the viability of composting at businesses here on Cape Cod. As promised, we are going to take some questions now. Meg, do we have any questions in the chat room?
Yes, actually, we do. One for Christine. Are you willing to share the slides that you had, or do we need to wait for the guide to come out? And if so, when do you anticipate the guide coming out?
We'd be happy to share the slides. The guide is, we need some help from professionals to turn a spreadsheet into something a little bit more dressy, but we have the raw data, and we're hoping to provide that within the next few weeks. We've wrapped up research. The challenge is that new things are coming out all the time. The market is very dynamic, because as new issues are found from testing with unhealthy chemicals, new products come in to fill that in. Just as a note on the molded fiber bowls were really big with big chains like Sweet Greens and Chipotle. Once it became clear that those were not the best choice, then a lot of vendors were coming up with other options. So there's new products coming all the time. So it's going to be an online resource. I'm happy to share them. I'll get the slides to Jill, and then we'll get something preliminary, not in a pretty form, but at least with links and costs. We're tracking what the per item cost is to make sure that we're choosing and recommending things that are cost competitive. It's hard to be cost competitive with plastic because it's so very cheap, but close enough to make it affordable.
Okay, and I've got one here for Tracy. So in your mini rotating drums, I'll call them, how long does it actually take for you to produce usable compost?
It's a great question. The product coming out, I mean, truth be told, we're pulling it out of those Jora units before it is perfect compost. And what we're doing is putting them off site. We have a staff house where we have a garden. So, you know, when Mary talks about that 18-month cycle, I mean, we need about a month in the tumbler to get it out so that it's, you can easily get it out. It's decomposed enough with the brown matter, with the leaves we're putting in and everything else. And then it goes off site. That's where, you know, I evaluated, I didn't have the option of those big digestive units, which are fantastic because they're super powered. I looked at a company that is working with the city of New York. This was great news to me because they want to put, you know, these units in restaurants in New York so that the compost is literally, you know, the guy was advertising it that you would get a bag of compost with your meal, which I thought was just such a great sales point. So it's about a month, and then it goes off site to a garden area, and then we use it in the gardens the next season. So long story short, about 4 weeks.
And so this question is for both you and for Mary. How much training, and I'm going to add retraining, do you have to do for your staff? I know, you know, I've talked with Mary before about, you know, if she gets too many contaminated loads, she has to either cut the person, you know, the business off or go back and retrain. Is this something, you know, it's great if you have employees who have been there and are staying there, and, you know, you don't need necessarily to retrain them, or do you?
Mary, I'll jump in because I'll answer the training. Honestly, I now it's an interview question when I interview staff, everyone from a 17-year-old busser to a 32-year-old seasoned line cook coming to us from Philadelphia or something. I'm hands-on, I'm in the restaurant. You know, my husband and I are there 6 days a week, 75 hours a week. So we just continually, the signs are fantastic, the photos, everything that Mary's doing, I mean, that's incredible. What we're trying to, again, the percentage thing, I have a really high standard for staff. You you know, when we're doing regular service, when we get into that chaos kind of mode of August, the third week of August, it's understandable that there would be more contaminants because people are moving too quickly. But it's a core value, and I communicate that from the beginning, because we have staff coming in, not only from different parts of the country, but all over the world. My husband's South African, and we work with some South African culinary students. There's no recycling. I mean, they'll throw out everything. So there is a lot of training. It's a lot of signs, and it's, you know, the same thing I'm doing with my sons. It's a constant message. And we do it across the board. We reward staff for riding bikes, for bringing in reusable water containers, for repackaging things when they take staff meals out, so that we're not using any of the minimal packaging that we have for to go or for you know, take home. So it's really, you have to kind of, it's a total mentality, and yet we really have to. And what happens is that the staff really get excited and they help each other. I can't be in every department or every location. So, you know, it's a returning staff member who's really excited about what we're doing, and then they help each other in each department. But I'll let Mary speak to her. The graphics and the signs and everything she's doing are fantastic. They're invaluable.
Mary?
Thanks. Yeah, well, I would just say ditto to everything that Tracy said. I mean, you covered it really well. Yes, on the Cape, cultural differences are huge because so many restaurant staff, seasonal staff especially, are coming from different parts of the world. On the plus side, a lot of our college students, or most of our college students now, are learning about composting at school. So, and that's a big change from 10 years ago, I would say, where that age group wasn't exposed. Yeah. So there's so many good things happening, and what Tracy's doing is really amazing, that it's really in your culture and it's part of your core values. I'd say that the challenge will become, as composting becomes required for larger restaurants, the real challenge will be there to do successful composting or successful sorting in the kitchen with restaurants who do not have composting as a core value. So that will be our next big challenge. So right now, most of our clientele are highly motivated because of their own mission. So I'll leave it with that. Yeah.
Mary, do you mind if I just jump in on that point?
Absolutely.
Which I think is interesting in the industry. A lot of this is what we're trying to do. It's a big PR message to restaurant owners and operators. You know, it's good for the environment. You can save money. But what's so exciting, what's happening very quickly, and with the public really getting on board, what restaurant now serves with a plastic straw? You know, that was, I mean, the boom and the demand for eliminating plastic straws with this, you know, this incredible PR mission. It was so dramatic that the industry was scrambling to produce paper straws, and there was, you know, such a demand. We couldn't, those aardvark straws were, they couldn't keep up with the supply. So that's a really wonderful thing. We want to get to that place with composting where the public is informed and they're demanding it of restaurants before it's mandated by the state, which I think right now it's any restaurant that produces over 1 ton, it's mandatory. And it will really take the consumer to drive that. And we can see consumers are already doing that with the choices that they're making, where they're dining, where they're eating, what they're purchasing. So that's good news. We need good news right now.
So Mary, I have another question for you. Will Black Earth look into servicing local schools? Have they said anything to you about that, or?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Black Earth is taking over my municipal clients, and that will include the Mashpee Public Schools.
Great.
And perhaps any of the others. I've been working, you know, we've been talking with Falmouth for a number of years now, and it hasn't been implemented yet. But yes, Black Earth does already work with a number of colleges and other institutional customers. So they will be, I'm sure they will be happy to talk with school systems.
And so I thought it was interesting, Tracy, you talked about just doing the, I'll call it the kitchen prep food waste. And you noted that one of the reasons that you don't do the table scraps is because of the oils and grease. Mary, does that present any problem on the larger scale, or is it you can virtually take any organic?
Well, so yeah, that's a very good question. I ask the restaurants not to pour in large amounts of liquids and specifically not a lot of oil and grease. But because of the large scale, if I'm dumping in a trash can full and people have put a cup of liquid or a cup of salad dressing, it just goes into the mix. If I were working with a feedstock, we'll go back to that question. If I were working with a feedstock from, say, a company that made salad dressing, for instance, I would be processing that quite differently. I would be using sawdust or something to very specifically make a mix, make a new recipe that handled that specifically. But in general, small amounts are not a problem in a very large system.
Well, the last question that I see here is about plastic straws, or excuse me, compostable straws. I guess, I think maybe Christine, it goes back to you. You know, you talked about how the clear PLA is definitely not not preferable because it's very difficult to tell it. You know, when we're talking on the other side, you know, when we're talking about recycling, it's confusing to people. So apparently there are compostable straws, and there's also plastic straws. And this is my question. Short of reading on the side of the box, how is anyone telling the difference? Or is it strictly a purchasing issue?
That is a good question. And I know that the aardvark paper straws are definitely compostable. And there are also straws that are coming out that are made, they're actually wheat stalks. And I mean, there's all kinds of things that people are using. And that question about how do you tell is important for utensils and straws and small things like that because they're not marked. And the only way you can tell, for example, with a cutlery product is what's marked on the box. And that's why it's the clear PLA and the clear plastic are such a contamination issue. But I would turn that over to Mary in terms of, you know, what types of material. I would imagine that any plant-based straw would work, but I'll turn it over to you, Mary.
Sure. Yes, so compostable PLA straws do compost really well. They break down very fast. So one way that I could tell you, if I saw two straws that went into the compost at the same time, they might look identical on day one. So that would be a problem. So I wouldn't know. So I would want to handle that firsthand with my restaurants because I know the restaurants that I work with, and they should only be throwing straws in if they're buying compostable. So I would rely on a trust there that they're only throwing them in. Or throwing only the compostable ones into the compost. But the compostable PLA straws are so thin that they break down really quickly. So like within a couple of days in a hot compost pile, they've already begun to shred apart to pieces. Whereas a traditional plastic straw will last a year or more without even beginning to crumble. So time will tell for me, so I can tell eventually. But ideally, that's just part of the relationship that I have with my customers.
Interesting. So just a comment for all of the great information that Stephanie gave us. It was, you know, when you look at those numbers of the amount of food produced and the amount of food wasted, it's, gosh, you just stop and go, oh my God, what are we doing? And I really personally appreciated you bringing up the information about the successful waste reduction programs that many restaurants are starting to implement. I know that there are different measurement tools out there that help a kitchen to reduce the amount of food waste that it potentially may produce. So that was really good information. And I think, you know, some of it is common sense, but some of it is also, there are data collection tools, again, that help a restaurant to understand how they can reduce the amount of wasted material, you know, that they have to compost or get rid of, one or the other. I think that is all the questions. Let me just check one more time. Well, Mary, no, there's one more question for Mary. Can you say a little bit about the heat needed for PLA to break down? And related to that, just quickly, what happens if you go over 130 degrees?
Oh, okay. Sure. Going over 130 degrees is fun. We love to put the thermometer in and see it go up to 160 or something. That's just, you know, that's how composters have fun. Nothing really bad happens. It's the microorganisms that it's the microorganisms that actually make the heat. That's a whole nother story that I'm not going to get into right now. But the types of them will die off at the higher temperatures. So 130 is sort of the sweet spot where you have the most microorganisms that are living and doing the work. If it spikes really high, you may get a die off, and that may slow the process, but then it corrects itself. So it's all okay. And so about the PLA breaking down, yeah, the high temperatures are what is required for those things to break down, because they start kind of by melting, and so it's part of the process. And that is why on a lot of those products, it says not compostable except in an industrial compost facility. So your backyard compost is not likely to get up to 130, although probably there are some really good composters that can do that. But that's why, that's the whole reason about the industrial compost site note that's on those products. Did that answer your question? You think?
Yes, it did. It did. And I don't see any other questions, and we're closing in on 11 o'clock. We try to not make these too long, only from the perspective that it's if you're not in the active session, this is a long time to be sitting still. So Jill, I don't know if we're ready to wrap up. Gabby?
Sure, sounds like a great plan. We want to thank everyone for being here today. Today's Care About a Clean Cape and Island Summit, Can My Business Compost, will be available to view again on Care for the Cape and Islands website. And on this Friday's episode of Cape Media News, we will have a special segment dedicated to today's session. If you'd like to join the movement to create a responsible environment on Cape Cod, visit careforthecapeandislands.org or Take Care Cape Cod. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you next time.